أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحكيم العليم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Before we get into the purpose of these rihlas, why we started them. The Muslims have a tradition of traveling for knowledge. In fact, that's where the word comes from, rihla. That's what they used to call them. And a lot of scholars actually wrote their rahilat. So they have their journals, and they would keep them on their journeys, and they would talk about who they met and what ulama they took from, and these became a type of literature in the Muslim world. But the benefit of traveling is getting away from the ma'loof, what you're accustomed to. The people of tasawwuf say that the thing most destructive to a person is routine, is falling into routine. And that's why God throws so many wrenches into the lives of human beings. Because without those wrenches, we become cogs in a machine of our own device. So there's a benefit in getting out of one's routine. Ramadan is certainly a month that every year turns everything upside down. And for a lot of people, the first few days are quite difficult because of that turning upside down. For people that fast throughout the year, it's not as problematic. There's a reason why fasting in Rajab and Sha'ban are considered virtuous acts, because it's preparing you for Ramadan so that you don't come into it cold turkey, so to speak. So it's a benefit to go. One of the problems with the modern world is that we have technology that enables us to pretty much be in the same place wherever we are. We also have a type of hegemonic corporate global culture that tends to provide the same services wherever we are. So you can go to the depths of Africa and stay in the Intercontinental Hotel and have the same marmalade that's made in England and the same tea that you'd drink in Hong Kong or somewhere else. So the problem with that is obvious for people that actually have experienced traveling at a different level. But one of the most important things about traveling is, in fact, in some ways, and I've spent a lot of time in airports, so this is not something that just kind of popped into my head. I spent a lot of time thinking about airports. In some ways, the world is like an airport. It's like we've been put here, and we're all waiting to get on a plane to somewhere else. And one of the things that's so interesting to me about airports is that people tend to generally be on their best behavior. Lines, or even in the Muslim world, lines tend to be better in airports than they are in other places, because they're non-existent in other places. But people tend to be quite well behaved in airports. There's a kind of comportment that's quite surprising. People are very, there's a lot of deference, there's people helping each other, helping with the bags. And part of the reason is because everybody knows they're going through the same torture of being on a journey. So it certainly helps when other people are willing to help you out in that. So there's perhaps a utilitarian aspect to that. But nonetheless, traveling brings out the best in people and it brings out the worst in people, which is why the Arabs call it safar, which means to expose, yusfiru an al-mar'i. The same word for ambassador, safir, because he tells the people he's sent to what the intentions of his government are vis-a-vis those people. So he's revealing the intentions of his government. So safar is a type of revelation for yourself and for others. And one of the things that's interesting about people when they travel, there's a lot of people think somehow things are going to get better if they can just get out of where they are. Now for some people that's true. If you have malaria, it's usually wise to move out of the malarial swamp area in order to get treated. If you stay in the malarial swamp area, you can treat yourself or have somebody treat you with quinine, but you get reinfected. One of the bizarre aspects of American penal system is that they force parolees to go back to the same place that they committed the crime and actually to stay there. Sometimes within very small, narrow areas. So they go back to the same gangsters that got them in trouble in the first place, and the same types of temptations, instead of allowing them to actually get out of those environments. So sometimes that's true. To get out of an environment is actually a useful thing. If somebody's in a domestic situation where there's a lot of anger and violence and trouble, they're not going to really be able to start meditating seriously until they get out of that type of environment, because it's just difficult to be able to concentrate when there's a lot of anger and hostility in the room. That's true just for people normally. So that does happen. There's a benefit in leaving. But for a lot of people, when they go to another place, they find out they're the exact same person that they were in the place they just left. And the same things that they struggle with are those same things that they find themselves struggling with there. So people come to me and say, I really want to learn Arabic, but I have to go somewhere to learn Arabic. And there's maybe an element of truth to that sometimes, but a lot of times when they go to that place where they think they're going to learn the Arabic, they end up doing exactly the same thing they were doing in the other place. And so I've met people that have gone to the Arab world, lived 2, 3, 4 years, and their intention was to learn Arabic, and they come back and you say, "Ta'lamta al-Arabiyya," and they say, "Shwayya." You know, that's happened a lot. On the other hand, I know people that have never left America that can read fluent Arabic. So you have to look into your hearts and look at what your intentions were. Because the Prophet ﷺ, and it's one of the most important hadiths, and in some ways it's the single most important hadith, إِنَّمَا الْعَمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are by intentions. وَإِنَّ لِكُلِّ إِمْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. And every man or woman has what he or she intends in their actions. فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى دُنْيَا لِيُصِيبَهَا أَوْ إِمْرَأَةً يَنْكِحُهَا فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. You know, he ends that by saying, مَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ فَهِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ. So whoever's hijrah is to Allah and His Messenger, and then he repeats it, then his migration is to Allah and His Messenger. So he repeats that. But when he says, but whoever's migration is for some worldly attainment, or for a spouse they're trying to get, then their hijrah is to what? إِلَى مَا هَاجَرَ إِلَيْهِ. He didn't name it again. With Allah and His Messenger, He repeated it. But with those low things, He didn't really waste the words in mentioning them again, because they weren't worth mentioning. And so that's the difference between people. Some people have high himmah, and himmah is your aspiration. It's what your heart's connected to. We have an American saying from Ralph Waldo Emerson, you know, hit your wagon to a star. In other words, have high himmah, you know, when you do things. Imam al-Junaid once saw a man about to be executed for brigandry, and he greeted the man, and one of his students said, do you greet a man like that? He said, I'm impressed with any man that's willing to risk his life for what he wants. You know, and so And that's in essence part of the mystique that we have with bank robbers in America. You know, people are kind of, there's a kind of hidden admiration for people that are willing to just risk it all for what they want. Maulana Rumi said, you know, if you want to fornicate, find a princess. You know, don't waste something like that on, you know, something low. Because if you're going to go to hell, you might as well go to hell in a really nice vehicle. Do you know, just go in style. So you have to look at your, you know, what your niyyah is, you know, what you want. Now, one of the things that our tradition roots itself in is the idea of adab. And adab it's a difficult word to translate. I mean, I have a report card from my great-grandmother, Lillian Cummings. She was in high school in Wisconsin in 1882, because I have her little handwriting on the book, because I got the book from my father, who got it from his father. But I know she had a toothache on December 10th, 1882. It's a very strange thing to know about your great-grandmother who you never met. But she has a report card in this book on rhetoric. And the very first thing on that report card that she was graded on was comportment. Now, we don't even use that word anymore in this culture. In fact, most people don't even know what that word means, comportment. I think people that speak Spanish know it because they still use it. But if you ask the average American, what is comportment? Isn't that in the car, you put something into it or something? You know. La ilaha illallah. So comportment comes from two Latin words which mean how you carry yourself. You know, like a porter carries things. So your comportment is the way in which you carry yourself. So adab is related to that. Not everything in the Sharia is specified. There are certain things that relate to adab. I'll give you an example. When Bilal radiallahu anhu brought Safiya and her sister, who were notables from the Jewish community, when he brought them to the Prophet ﷺ's tent, he passed through an area where this battle had taken place at Khaybar, and there were some dead relatives, Jewish relatives that they had. And one of the women began to wail because she was so distressed by seeing her relatives in that state. And the Prophet came out to see what happened, and when he saw this, he said, "What are you doing?" He said, I was bringing Sophia and her sister to you. And he said, "Couldn't you find another way to bring them?" And Bilal said, "I didn't think you would mind." And then the Prophet looked at him and he said, "Aina rahmatuka?" Where is your mercy? You know, in other words, you don't need Sharia. You don't need like a revelation to have basic common decency. And so a lot of adab is just that. It's just a basic common decency. One of the things that is a hallmark of Islamic learning is the relationship between students and teachers is a relationship of respect and compassion. The Prophet said, "Laysa minna man la yarham saghirana wa la yuwaqqir kabirana." He is not, or she is not from among us, the one who does not respect our elders. And kabir is not just in age, but it's in knowledge, it's in anything that puts you in that ranking. And does not have compassion for our young ones. So there's that relationship of you know, a teacher is supposed to be compassionate with the students, but the students are also supposed to show respect to the teachers. So those things are acquired, some things. Some of it's just purely breeding. It's the way you were raised. I've noted that a lot of people coming from the South Asian community tend to have that drilled in them. In America, we tend to have a more informal relationship with teachers. And to be honest with you, when I studied in West Africa, and it's certainly a lot more informal than it is, say, in Syria. But if in Syria, students are kicked out of classes all the time. And teachers won't teach certain students if they exhibit certain behaviors. Imam Malik radiyallahu anhu was very strict in his majlis, especially if it was hadith, because of the the exalted nature of it. So there's definitely a great benefit in having that comportment and learning it and acquiring it. Now, personally, I used to be a lot harsher about this, and I'm only talking about it because I was kind of asked to talk about it. But I do think that it is important. And years ago, I was in Medina, and one of my teachers from early on, when I was maybe 19, one of my teachers, he's a Mauritanian, came in and we met him. I hadn't seen him in a while. And I had several Western students. And he just started talking about what I was like when I was his student. And I had completely forgotten a lot of things, but I was very happy when he just said that I had an immense amount of respect for him. And he said that he used to make me tea because I didn't know how to make Mauritanian tea. And he said, and I didn't even remember this, but he said this. He said that I demanded that he teach me how to make tea because I could not have my teacher make tea for me. So I think part of the benefit that I derived from the teachers that I studied with was from having that drilled into me, because it was drilled into me. My father was he was old school in terms of, he told me once he saw Robert Frost give a reading. I think it was at Fordham University. My father went to Fordham for a year. But he said he saw Robert Frost, and Frost came out. And he said there was an undergraduate that was in the front row, and he was kind of slouched down like this. And he said Frost came out, and he looked down at this man with an utter contempt, like just a winsome scorn. And he looked down at him, and he said, "Sit up!" And my father said that this young man just stood up, and for the rest of the reading, he was like that the entire time. That was a university student, and that was in the 1950s. Now, nowadays, that teacher might get shot if they try something like that. I don't know. But that certainly was a very different experience from my experience at school and how students. But we're of another tradition, and we're trying to maintain that tradition to the best of our ability. And so it's important, and that's all I'm going to say about that. So, alhamdulillah, we're going now on a section here. This next section is about the beatific vision. Now, the reason that I use the beatific vision for the ru'ya is because in Christianity, the beatific vision is part of the afterlife. And I think some Muslims tend to forget that we do share a lot of truths with the previous dispensations, with the Jews and the Christians. The Jews consider one of the highest degrees in Judaism is called Zadok. Zadok is Siddiq. from the same. In fact, minhaj, minhog in Hebrew, is mentioned shar'atan wa minhaja in the Quran. So the minhog is the way or the methodology that's used in the Sharia. So the Quran shares words with the previous traditions because they're the same truths that were being explained. The beatific vision, which is a ru'ya, is the greatest bounty of the next life, whereby the inhabitants of paradise will gaze upon the countenance of God without any veil. And there's different layers of this. Some people have access on a regular basis. And regular, I'm not talking time, it's not even something that we can really comprehend. But there's different peoples, depending on the types of people in this world and how they prepared for the next world. But the word, the Quran says, Imam al-Tahawi says, الرؤية حق لأهل الجنة بغير إحاطة ولا كيفية. So the ru'ya is a reality for the people of paradise without enclosure. There's no ihata, so you don't see God like there's ihata. When I look at this glass, I'm seeing the glass. It's muhat, right? I can see it. There's no ihata when we talk about the vision of God. Wala kayfiya, and there's no modality. So what does that mean? The word modality refers to the form in which something is understood. The way in which a quality is or can be possessed by a thing is in green as a mode of the quality of color. So, or it can be possessed by a thing as in green as a mode. Thus, the beatific vision is a vision, the mode of which is incomprehensible. And in his commentary on Imam Tahawi's Creed, Abdul Ghani al-Maydani, who was one of the scholars from Syria, says the vision of the transcendent, holy essence of God, the sublimely exalted, without encirclement or direction, is true and real for the people of paradise. However, this vision is not with dimensions or limits due to God's transcendence beyond finiteness, descriptions, limits, and containment. It is amodal, bila kayf, in its nature, and has no direction, distance, description, or light rays connecting the seer and the seen, nor any distance between the one gazing and the object of his gaze. For all of that is related to the vision of bodies and substances, and God, the sublime and exalted, is not a body contained in dimensions. Therefore, envisioning God, the sublime and exalted, cannot be likened to gazing upon a body. Vision is in accordance with what is being seen. So that's what he says. Now, this is an important point to mention, that because Imam al-Tahawi, what's interesting is that he is writing at a time when there was a great deal of confusion about what a lot of these things meant. And he's one of the first formulators of a creed to really get to the essence of what we believe in. And there were people during his time that actually denied the possibility of seeing God. There were other people that understood it in an anthropomorphic sense, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be seen in some kind of way that we see things in the world. And one errs on the side of what's called tashbih, which is immanence to a certain degree. I mean, these terms are dangerous in Western theology because tashbih it can be also understood as anthropomorphic or anthropomorphism. Tajsim is a type of tashbih, which is more anthropomorphism. But tashbih is how God is likened to us. In other words, in order to speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to use words. And in using words, we enter into the problem of language. Language by its nature is problematic because language is symbolic. When I say tree, the image of a tree comes up in your mind. I don't know what kind of tree. You might see a laurel tree. You might see a poplar tree. You might see an oak tree. You might see a pine tree. One could argue that none of those are really in that category of what we've determined to be tree. But language is what we use to convey meaning. And so the basic idea of a tree is something that has a trunk. It actually has to be a certain height before it goes under the name tree in scientific taxonomy. If it's less than something, it's called a shrub or something like that. So you have a tree, but you have palmates. Somebody could argue that's not a tree, a palm tree. Doesn't look really like a tree, but it's considered a tree. It's a type of tree. It's a palmate. So when we speak about trees, I'm using that word to conjure up an image in your mind. And the image is the image of a tree that we share when we use this language. Now I can qualify it with adjectives, which helps. For instance, I could say a perennial tree. And now you know I'm talking about certain types of trees that the leaves never fall. Or a decidual tree. Or I can talk about a pine tree which has certain needle-like leaves and not broadleaves. So those adjectives help understand it. Now when we talk about God, we're in a whole other realm, because what we're talking about is what is ineffable. It's that which cannot truly be described. Ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. Exalted is God above any descriptions they can give to God. That's what Allah says. Ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. God is beyond their descriptions. Ma qadrullah haqqa qadrihi. They did not give God a true estimation. And so language falls short, but God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, uses language in the Quran. And He uses a language that can give us some type of approximation, but at the same time it can lead to a type of misunderstanding. And this is why our ulama say, كُلُّ نَصًّا أَوْهَمَ التَّشْبِيهَ فَوِّضْ أَوْ أَوِّلْهُ وَرُمْ تَنْزِيهَ. Every text, hadith or Quran, that gives some type of likeness, when it's talking about Allah, to this world, fawwid, either completely leave it up to God, in other words, say I don't know what it means but I believe in it, or defer it to God. Tafweed is like a deferment. I'm going to defer that meaning. I don't know what it means. Or you interpret it. Now, ta'wil, which is what that is to say where you actually say what it means. In other words, you give it a metaphorical meaning. Some of the later ulama preferred that method, but the early ulama did not. They preferred to look at these meanings, and they said they definitely don't mean what they think they appear to mean, because that's impossible. But I'm not going to say what they mean. Now they take that from a verse in Ali Imran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ. He has revealed to you this book. فِيهِ آيَاتٌ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ وَأُخَرَ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمَّ الْكِتَابِ. It has muhkamat, ayatun muhkamat. It has clear ayahs. Their meaning is absolutely clear. Hunna al-kitab. They're the matrix of the book. They're where you derive all of your necessary meanings from. وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. But there are other meanings in this Quran that are hazy. They're metaphorical. They're not clear what they mean. They have more than one possible interpretation. Now there's debate about what those two terms mean, but generally the ulama understand them, that some ayahs are clear and other verses are not clear. And then it says, فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. As for those who have deviation in their heart, They follow the hazy verses. That's what they incline to, these hazy verses in the Quran. ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء التأويل. Seeking dissension and tribulations and troubles. There's some people, believe it or not, they actually enjoy causing problems. It excites them. There's people I've seen in our community that never do anything. And then when some kind of fitna, suddenly they're typing, they're faxing, they're calling, they just get so excited about some fitna. Did you know? And he did, and this, and he said, and he stole this money from them. And they never do anything. They never volunteer, nothing. But when a fitna comes, they just get so excited. So the Quran says they desire fitna. They desire this dissension, this trouble, this strife. And then it says, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. But no one knows the real meaning of these verses except Allah. Nobody knows the real meaning of these verses except Allah. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. And those who are firmly rooted in knowledge. يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ. We believe in it. كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All of this is from Allah. This is what they say. The people. Now, some of the ulama, and I mean, you have to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for whatever reasons, right there in that verse, there's a debate. Because the Quran is a book that doesn't use punctuation. Punctuation is a modern invention. We've only had punctuation in English for a few hundred years. There's no punctuation in the Quran. So how do you know when there's a period? It's open to debate. There is a certain type of wow that's used for a period in the Quran. Istitnaf. But then there's a wow that's used as a conjunction. So in this verse it says, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. No one knows the interpretation except Allah and those firmly rooted in knowledge. So some say that wow is actually includes this group of people that knows what these verses mean. And there's a riwayah from Ibn Abbas that said, أَنَا مِنَ الرَّاسِخِينَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. I'm amongst those who are from the firmly rooted knowledge, وَأَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلُهُ. And I know the interpretation. And we know the Prophet made the dua, Allahumma faqihhu fi d-din wa'allimhu at-ta'wil. Oh Allah, teach him knowledge of this religion and how to interpret the meanings of the Quran. And they said about Ibn Abbas, Sayyidina Ali said about Ibn Abbas, he used to look at the Quran as if he was looking at the unseen with a thinly veiled garment before it that you could see through. So it wasn't completely, but you could see to the other side. So Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said that, and then now what's interesting is the verses in the Quran that, if you look at all the deviant sects of Islam, all of them, without exception, focused on these verses. All of them. You look at every single deviant sect in the history of Islam, and they take hazy verses and they tell you what they mean. So the Qadariyya said, Allah said this, and that's why we say that there's no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely left human beings free to do whatever they want. There's nothing stopping them from doing what they want. The Jabriyya said the opposite. And they used these verses in the Quran. Everybody used what they wanted. Now, Allah says, immediately after that, وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. And the only people that really understand this, the only people that really recollect what's being said here, are the people who use their intellects. If you don't have intellect when coming to the Quran leads people astray. The Quran becomes a book that you can find countless things in it. It's a holistic book. If you take part of أَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ, do you believe in some of the book and reject other parts of the book? And that's what some of these sects do, because the people that say God is in a direction, and there are people, we have people, that's a popular madhab these days. You know, there are people that say God is in a physical direction, which is folk, which is very weird because China's under us. You know, now we know that the earth is round. So that becomes a problem for people that think, because our up is their down, and their up is our down. You know, there's people that think that God physically descends to the lowest heaven in the last third of the night, because it's a hadith in al-Bukhari. You know, Inna Rabbana la yanziru kulla laylatin ila sama'i dunya. God comes down to the. But now we know that the third part of the night is coming in every instant. Because I can call people throughout the day, and there's a third part of the night somewhere on this planet every instant. So what does that mean? He's always doing that? I mean, this is, you know, these people, naqal is tradition. It's what's handed down. Aqal is intellect. It's how you interpret the tradition. Naqal heads are people that don't use their aqal. They don't use the aqal. It's just naqal. Really, it's a problem. So, unfortunately, for some reason or another, there are a lot of people, but people want simplicity. They want to just reduce everything to black and white. It's the fundamental impulse. It's that Protestant impulse of rejecting nuances, rejecting the fact that the world is not melodramatic. The world is not black and white. There are hues and shades. There's diversity. And things just aren't as clear as people like to make them out to be. That there are mutashabihat in life. The Prophet said, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنٌ وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنٌ وَبَيْنُهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُتَشَابِهَاتٍ in a riwayah and mushtabihat in another riwayah. That the halal is clear and the haram is clear. And between them are hazy things. There's gray areas. People want it. Is it halal, haram? That's it. That's what people want. Halal, haram. You know, people ask you a question, you say, there's a difference of opinion. Don't tell me, is it halal or haram? It's just not that simple. You know, if you want a simpleton's religion, you're in the wrong religion. This is not a religion for simple people, dummies. There are people that can be in Islam and be simple, that's fine, but they can't reduce the religion to their level. The religion is celestial. If they want to pull it down to their terrestrial level, then they're doing a grave disservice to this religion. Because it's something very high. And that's why these ulama who, I mean, I'll give you an example. Fakhruddin al-Razi said about the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put hazy verses in there. He said God could have just made it all black and white. Do this, and this. Don't do this, and that. And made it all clear. Because there's things, the Prophet ﷺ said, God told you some things. And he said, وَسَكَتَ عَنْ أَشْيَاءَ رَحْمَةً لَكُمْ. He was silent about things as a mercy to you. فَلَا تَبْحَثُوا عَنْهَا أَوْ لَا تَسَرُوا عَنْهَا. Don't seek them out, those things that God was silent about. Just leave that. It's mercy of God. The Prophet said, حَيَاتِي خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَمَوْتِي خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ تُحْدِثُونَ فَيُحْدَثَ لَكُمْ. My life is good for you, but my death is also good for you. Because you do things and then you get rulings about them. So when the Prophet was alive, people would do things and then they'd get a ruling to say you can't do that. So if the Prophet, what he was saying was, if I stayed with you it would just get too overwhelming. In fact, one man came to the Prophet and he said, كَثُرَتْ عَلَيَّ شَرَائِعُ الْإِسْلَامِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. The rules have gotten too much for me. فَدُلَّنِي عَلَى شَيْءٍ أَتَشَبَّثُ بِهِ. Give me something that I can cling to and I'm going to be saved by it. And he said, لَا يَزَالُ لِسَانُكَ رَطْبًا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. May your tongue always be moist with the remembrance of God. It's like, and that is just a reminder that, you can attempt to follow all the rules. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَوْغِلُوا فِي هَذَا الدِّينِ بِالرِّفْقِ. Enter into this deen gently. فَلَنْ يُشَادَّ الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. Because nobody tries to take on this religion in its entirety except he will be completely overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed. There are doors to paradise. There's a door of charity. Some people that door's not open to. Some people it's open to. But then there's the door of fasting. Some people that door's not open to. Other people, that's the door they go to paradise by. The 8 doors. And Abu Bakr said, does anybody go through all 8? And he said, yes, and I hope that you'll be one of them. But Abu Bakr did more before Fajr than most people do in their month. Because we know, people wonder how Abu Bakr, the Prophet said, if my Ummah's faith was put in one scale and Abu Bakr's in the other scale, Abu Bakr would outweigh them. At Fajr, the Prophet once asked, did anybody visit a sick person this morning? Abu Bakr, I did, Ya Rasulullah. He said, did anybody give charity this morning? Abu Bakr, I did, Ya Rasulullah. Did anybody wake up fasting this morning? Abu Bakr, I did, Ya Rasulullah. Did anybody follow a funeral janazah this morning? Abu Bakr, I did, Ya Rasulullah. This was before Fajr. And that's why when Omar wanted, he thought, okay, I'm going to get him this time. Tabuk. Really, Omar used to compete, he wanted, because he was the second best and he wanted, it's like the one that tries harder, the second person. And he said, Tabuk, I'm going to give half my money for this expedition and I'm going to finally get Abu Bakr. I'll outdo him this time. So he brings half his money, just really excited and Prophet, mashallah. And then Abu Bakr comes and puts his money down. The Prophet said to Omar, what did you leave for your family? He said, I left half. And then he looked at Abu Bakr and he said, what did you leave for your family? He said, Taraktu lahum Allah wa rasuluhu. I left for them God and His Messenger. He gave it all. And at that point Omar said, I'm never going to try to compete with this man. So, those, this modern impulse to reduce this religion to slogans, to reduce it to simplistic formulas, it's not going to work. And like I said, it's a disservice to the religion. Fakhruddin al-Razi said the reason that Allah has given us this complexity is because, he gives several reasons, but among them he says, had it all been spelled out, black and white, no difficulties, we would have been like automatons. There would have been no diversity. There would only been one madhab, one way of doing things, and everybody had to follow it. That's not human nature. You will never have all of humanity agreeing on any one thing. And so diversity is our nature. There are people that are strict, so there's all these hadith that suit those strict people. There are people that are lenient. There's all these other hadiths that suit those lenient people. There are people that really like to be strict on themselves and on others. And there's all these hadiths that they're going to find they fit them perfectly. They seem to know all those hadiths. They don't know any of the other hadiths about leniency and but they know all those. That's the vastness of Islam. Is that, and then there's people that incline towards certain things that don't incline towards other things. And it's all there in the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah. So he says that vastness is the universality of Islam. And when you have a book that is nuanced, that is subtle, that can be interpreted on many different levels, it's going to encourage the universality. It's going to complement that aspect of humanity. And then he says another important aspect is that everybody wants to prove their point. So when they take a position about something in the Quran, they're going to work really hard to strengthen their position. So it forces a type of study. If everybody agreed on it, people wouldn't be studying. Like today, for the people that were in my Maliki class, I was talking about the difference between the sadl and the qabd. If there wasn't a difference of opinion, everybody would just be doing this and nobody would know why they're doing it other than that's what everybody does. But because there's a difference of opinion, it forces you to look at the hadiths, it forces you to know the people that had this opinion, why they had that opinion, and then what their dalil was and why. And so it creates a type of intellectual engagement with the tradition that would not otherwise exist, which is very important. I mean, one of the things, people tell me all the time, Muslims are always arguing over stupid things, like the moon sighting. Every year we have this argument. Why can't we just work it out? Well, it is amazing that we are an ummah that still cares about these things that much to where they're actually important. Because a lot of religions don't even care about these things anymore. And they're like, who cares? What's the big deal? And that's their attitude towards their religion. But for Muslims, they do care. They want to do the right thing, and there's different opinions about what the right thing is, and they get passionate about it. Now, sometimes they become overzealous, and that's a problem. But better in some ways to be overzealous than to be dead spiritually as a community, to not have any real zeal about your faith or your religion. So I don't think that's a negative about the Muslims. What we're lacking is civil society. What we're lacking is adab al-ikhtilaf. And one could argue that we've never had it universally in the Muslim Ummah. I'll give you a few examples just to point this out. Imam At-Tabari, his house was stoned by students of the Hanbali Madrasa in Iraq when he was teaching, because he didn't consider Ahmad a faqih. So they went and stoned his house. Imam al-Nasa'i was stomped to death by one of the greatest muhaddithin in Muslim history. He was literally stomped to death in a masjid. So it's not like there hasn't been these terrible things that have happened in our history. There have been terrible things. And you'll find these in all religious traditions. When you get fanatics, when you get idiots, when you get knuckleheads that have no other way of understanding something except their limited way. This provincial attitude, and that somehow it's my religious duty to stomp out any other way of viewing it. It's a problem. Religion becomes poisonous. As far as I'm concerned, it actually becomes a source of human suffering as opposed to a source of human enlightenment, of actually elevating people's states, of getting them closer to God. It distances them from God. They become harsh, hard-hearted. And that's why immediately after this verse, first of all, it warns us about people. Whenever you find people that are interested in, these verses in the Quran that are hazy, and they want you to make sure you know that they mean exactly what they say they mean, in other words, that they're muhkamat, the first thing, know that they're from the people of fitna, that Allah warns against, and that they have deviation in their hearts, they have zayg in their hearts. But the second thing, know that they don't have intellect. Because Allah praises the people of intellect at the end of those verses, saying that the people that really understand this are people of intellect, because they know that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, istawa ala al-arsh, that He's upon a throne, that they know by their intellect that it is absolutely inconceivable for the infinite creator of the heavens and the earth to be limited by time or space, to be mahmul, to be carried on anything. They know that. But they're not going to deny that verse because that verse is there. So they say we believe in it, but and we know it doesn't mean what it appears to mean, because with God there is no how. And this is what Imam Malik, when he was asked, كيف الاستواء? How did God istawa? Which in Arabic can mean to sit. So he asked, how did God do this istiwa? And Imam Malik said, al-istiwa ma'loom. The istiwa is known. In other words, that it's in the Quran. Wal-kayfa ghayru ma'qool. And the how is completely irrational. It's inconceivable. And in a riwayah majhul, it's not something you could ever know what that means. And then he said, وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدْعَةٌ. And to ask about it is a bid'ah. It's an innovation. Because none of the Salaf asked about it. That was Imam Malik's position. So the only reason I'm focusing on this is because this is a problem in our time. That's the only reason. I would pass over these a lot quicker, but you need to understand that there are people out there that are presenting a position and they're saying this is the position of the first community, and it's not. It's a deviant position. And they can call us deviants. That's fine. Allah says, I'm gonna settle this on the Day of Judgment. So you're a deviant, I'm a deviant, fine. We'll wait. Let's just act civilly towards each other. I'm going to pray next to you in the masjid. I'll break my Ramadan fast with you. I'll say Assalamu alaikum, and we'll be friends. You're a deviant, I'm a deviant. But on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we'll see who the deviant is. And I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to wait. But if defending God's vastness is deviancy, I'm willing to be a deviant. So when Allah is talking about this, our Prophet ﷺ said it's real. He went out in Sahih al-Bukhari. He went out in a sound hadith. He went out and they were looking at the moon, and he said, سَتَرَوْنَ رَبَّكُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ كَمَا تَرَوْنَ هَذَا الْبَدَرِ. You will see your Lord on the Day of Judgment like you see this moon. لَا تُضَامُّونَ. And you won't be crowded over one another. Because when you try to see something, if everybody's interested in seeing something in dunya, it's always becomes a crowd. What he was saying was, it's not going to be like that. But the ulama say when he pointed to the moon, what he means is with the same certainty that you see this moon. Because even we could interpret it if you wanted to. I'm not going to push the metaphor because he was definitely using the moon as metaphorically. But I'm not going to push the metaphor because the moon, the only way we see the moon is through reflected light. The moon is seen by the light of the sun. So it's not even the moon you're seeing. It's actually the light of the sun on the moon that you're seeing. So the metaphor is not in any way like God is going to be in a place like the moon is in a place or something like that. It's impossible. And that's why Imam al-Bayhaqi says, Malik, Layth, Layth bin Sa'ad, Imam al-Awza'i, all of them said about these hadiths that have any tashbih, likeness to the world, amirruha kama ja'at. Pass by them just as they have come. Pass amirruha kama ja'at. Wala tufassiruha. And don't try to explain what they mean. Now, some of the later ulama I mentioned did explain these things metaphorically, and it's a madhab. We don't consider them mubtadi'ah, and we don't consider them bad people, but the muhaqqiqun, our ulama, the people of tahqiq, the highest level, said that it's better just to leave them the way they are. Just say, "U'minu biha ala muradillah." Whatever God meant by them, I believe in them. And not to, because to interpret them, to speak about the essence of God, you really have to have an absolute proof. And that's why it's best to be people of tafweed. But at the same time, we don't in any way denigrate those great ulama that came to those conclusions, because they were interpreting the verse in the Quran that they were the rasikhun fil ilm. And that is one of the meanings of that verse. It's a possible meaning, although other ulama differed and said that it did not include that. So then the proofs for this, the Quran says, وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. Some faces will be aglow that day, gazing at their Lord. And then there's another verse, إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. On that day, the sinners will be veiled from God. Imam Shafi'i said, if the sinners are veiled, that means the righteous see God. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran tells us that Moses asked to see God, right? He said, Arini, Rabbi Arini, show me yourself. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him, Lan tarani, you won't see me. You can't see me. And then it said, وَلَكِنْ أُنظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ. Look at the mountain, right? فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانُهُ, right? فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي. If the mountain stabilizes, then you will see me. That's the verse, okay? Now, that is a proof that you can see God for two reasons. One, Moses will not ask the impossible of God because we don't ask God, oh Allah, give me 2 wings so I can fly to New York this weekend. We don't ask, it's bad adab to ask God, and it's haram to ask God. For the prophets, they can't ask that. I mean, an ignorant person is nothing, but the prophets will not ask God the impossible. So the fact that he asked to see God indicates that it's possible. But then the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ulama say, allaqa, in other words, he made a conditional sentence. And he said, in istaqar, if the mountain holds its place. When God revealed himself to the mountain collapsed. But if the mountain holds its place, you will see me. So he put it in an Arabic structure that permits seeing if the mountain held its place. But the mountain didn't hold its place. But it didn't say lo. Like lo, harfu imtina' and imtina'. In is a conditional that indicates possibility. So, and then there's other things. The Prophet ﷺ. Now, Aisha radiallahu anhu said, whoever says that the Prophet saw his Lord has a'zam al-firya, has really told a big untruth. That was her opinion. But Ibn Abbas said, in a hadith which is sound by Tabarani, he said, Ra'a Muhammadun Rabbuhu marratain. The Prophet ﷺ saw his Lord twice. Marratun bi basarihi wa marratun bi fuadihi. One time he saw him with vision, which is on the Isra, and another time he had a vision in the heart. And that's a sound tradition on Ibn Abbas. Now, the ulama, like Ma'mar ibn Rashid said, Aisha is not more knowledgeable than Ibn Abbas. They're both of equal stature in terms of knowledge. And in usul, in our in our methodology of interpretation, al-muthbit muqaddam ala nafi, that somebody who affirms something is actually taken over somebody who negates something. So for instance, if somebody comes and says, I saw the moon on Ramadan, and another person says, I didn't see the moon, we take the one who says, and muthbit muqaddam ala nafi. So when Aisha said the Prophet didn't see his Lord, and Ibn Abbas said the Prophet saw his Lord, Ibn Abbas's opinion is over Aisha's on that. And so there are two madhabs. But Aisha was interpreting the Quran. It wasn't because she heard that from the Prophet ﷺ. She was interpreting a Quran, la tudrikhu al-absar, that vision cannot contain him, which is true in the Quran. That is in the Quran. Vision cannot contain him. So the other thing about the ru'ya that's important to note is that it is possible for people in the world in dreams. And we know that Ahmed ibn Hanbal saw in a true narration from him, he saw his Lord 99 times. And he said, if I said that if I see him 100th time in a dream, that I would ask him. And so he saw him on the 100th time, and he said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how do people draw nearest to you? What is the closest way? And he said, by my speech. By my speech. And then Ahmad radiallahu anhu said, bi fahman or bi ghayri fahman. Through understanding it or just through reciting it without understanding. And Allah answered to him in this dream, bi fahman wa bi ghayri fahman ya Ahmad. Through understanding and not understanding. It didn't matter as long as they were reciting it, Ahmad. And Imam Bakri Rajab al-Halabi mentions one of the righteous people who saw him in a dream, and somebody asked him, how did you see him? And he said, and it's a very beautiful expression, but he said that my basar an'akasa basari basiratan, my sight became inner sight, fasirtu basari, fasirtu kulli basari, I became all vision, like my entire being became vision. Wa ra'aytu man laysa kamithlihi shay, and I saw what no thing is like him. So when we talk about the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're not talking about this eye, which is called Ayn al-Faniya, the temporal eye. We're talking about the eternal eye, the avi-eternal eye that God gives us in the next world. And then we're talking about a vision without encirclement, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be contained. La tudriku al-absar. Vision cannot contain God. There's no idrak with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَكُلُّ مَا جَاءَ فِي ذَلِكَ مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ الصَّحِيحِ عَنَ الرَّسُولِ فَهُوَ كَمَا قَالَ وَمَعْنَاهُ عَلَى مَا أَرَادَ لَا نَدْخُلُ فِي ذَلِكَ مُتَأَوِّلِينَ بِآرَائِنَا وَلَا مُتَوَهِّمِينَ بِأَهْوَائِنَا. All that came to us from the Messenger in the authentic hadith is just as he said it was, and the meaning is as he intended. We do not interpret any of it to accord with our opinions, nor did we presume any of it to accord with our whims. So this is very important. This is exactly what I was saying. He is saying, we believe in these things, but we're not going to interpret them, neither to say that they're literal. Obviously, because if he didn't believe that they weren't literal, he would say, we accept them literally. But he's not saying that. Now, and this is part of his, it's a very interesting thing that he does here. He says, and I debated about whether to interpret this literally, but it just didn't work very well in English. But in Arabic he says, فَإِنَّهُ مَا سَرِمَ فِي دِينِهِ إِلَّا مَنْ سَلَّمَ لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَلِرَسُولِهِ وَرَدَّ عِلْمَ مَا اشْتَبَهَ عَلَيْهِ إِلَى عَالِمِهِ. That no one is secure in his religion unless he resigns himself to God, the Sublime and the Exalted, and His Messenger, and consigns whatever obscures his understanding to the one who knows its meaning. In other words, I don't know what it means. So he's saying these mashtabaha alayhi. Just say God knows what it means. This is the Sunni Aqeedah. Don't say it means what it means literally, but we're not going to say how, because it's not literal. And then he says, وَلَا تَثْبُتُ قَدَمُ الْإِسْلَامِ إِلَّا عَلَى ظَهْرِ التَّسْلِيمِ. Then he uses a metaphor to really drive home this point. So he says, the foot of Islam is not firm on the back, except on the ground, on the back of resignation and surrender. So he's using a metaphor to show you, don't think that this, language is language. So when I talk about Islam having a foot, I don't mean that Islam has a foot with 5 toes and it walks around. And when I talk about the back of resignation, I don't mean that resignation has a back with a vertebrae. It's language, it's metaphor. And that's why he says that immediately after that. فمن رام علم ما حذر عنه علمه ولم يقنع بالتسليم فهمه حجبه مرامه عن خالص التوحيد وصافي المعرفة والصحيح الإيمان فيتذبذب بين الكفر والإيمان والتصديق والتكذيب والإقرار والإنكار موسوسا تائها شاكا زائغا لا مؤمنا مصدقا
وَلَا جَاحِدًا مُكَذِّبًا. Whoever covets knowledge that was barred from him, discontented with the limits of his understanding, shall be veiled from pure unity, unadulterated comprehension, and sound faith on account of his covetousness. He will then vacillate between belief and disbelief, assertion and negation, and resolution and denial. Obsessive, aimless, skeptical, and deviant, he is neither an assertive believer nor a resolute denier. Now, immediately after these verses in the Quran, رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا. Don't cause our hearts to swerve or deviate after you've guided us to this understanding, this pure tawheed. After you've don't deviate us. وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً. And give us mercy from your presence. إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْوَهَّابِ. You are the Wahhab. Right? Give us mercy. So, those who want from the Wahhab, right? Those who want from the Wahhab mercy are people that are worried about their hearts swerving. And they ask God, keep my heart straight, keep my heart firm on this path. Because there are many words that Allah uses in the Quran to indicate taba', right? That Allah seals their hearts. Khatama, He puts a veiling over their hajaba, right? Qaswa, their hearts become faqasat qulubuhum, their hearts become hard. Kalla bal rana ala qulubihim, their hearts become encrusted, right? فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبُهُم. When they deviated, God caused their hearts to deviate. There are many, many words. Akinna, their hearts are locked. Aqfal, qufl, am ala qulubin aqfaluha. Those are all to show you that you cannot get arrogant about this. That it is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you're on a straight path, and you should be concerned about staying on that straight path and not become arrogant. Because if you think you're rightly guided and everybody else is astray, God can make you astray and make everybody else rightly guided. And the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever faults another person for something in them, God may free that person of that thing and give you the tribulation. So you have to be very careful with people most people, most people are, they're just trying their best. There's a lot of people out there that are just trying. So if you've been blessed with guidance or something like that, you have to feel gratitude. And then, لَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ حَتَّى يُحِبَّ لِأَخِيهِ مَا يُحِبُّ لِنَفْسِهِ. You don't truly believe until you want for others what you want for yourself. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تؤمنوا حتى تراحموا. You won't believe until you have mercy. And one of them said, Ya Rasulullah, كلنا نرحم. We're all merciful. And he said, ليست رحمة أحدكم لصاحبه. I'm not talking about the mercy of somebody to his friend. ولكن رحمة الناس رحمة العامة. But I'm talking about having mercy for all of humanity. General mercy. Universal mercy. That's what I'm talking about. The Prophet's talking about universal mercy. Not anybody can be merciful to their friend. That's just natural. It's like the man who he was cleaning his mother because she lost continence, became incontinent to stool, and he was cleaning her, and he went to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm cleaning my mother the way she used to clean me when I was a baby. Is that birr? And he, am I being filial, showing filial piety? He said, no, that's just payback. Just recompense. So then he says, وَلَا يَصَحُ الْإِيمَانُ بِالرُّؤْيَةِ لِأَهْلِ دَارَ السَّلَامِ لِمَنْ اعْتَبَرَهَا مِنْهُمْ بِوَهْمٍ. Belief in the beatific vision of the denizens of paradise is incorrect for anyone who surmises that it is imaginary, or interprets it to be a type of comprehension. أو تأولها بفهم. Do you see? So we believe it is a vision. It's a ru'ya, and it's a ru'ya with the basar. It is a vision, but we don't say how. إذ كان تأويل الرؤية وتأويل كل معنى يضاف إلى الربوبية بترك التأويل ولزوم التسليم وعليه دين المسلمين وشرائع النبيين. And then he says, and this is very important, for correct interpretation of the beatific vision or any quality annexed to lordship lies in leaving interpretation. Don't say what it means. The tafweed means that you don't see what the sect that focuses on these verses, that what they say is, we know its ma'na, but we don't know its kayf. We know what it means, but we don't know the howness of it. So when Allah says He has a hand, it means He literally has a hand, but we're not going to say how that hand is. Do you understand? The people of tafweed say, we know that it does not mean what it appears to mean. But we're not going to say what it means. We just believe whatever God meant by it, that's what we believe about it. But we know that it doesn't mean, and if you want more proof for this, the Prophet ﷺ said, Yameen Allah, like the right hand of God. And then he said, Wakilta yadahu yameen. And both of his hands are right hands. I mean, if that doesn't just get it out of your mind, in other words, God doesn't have a left hand. But He's not saying, that there's two right hands over here. He's trying to get that out of your mind. These are words that are conveying metaphysical truths, and the dominant opinion is we don't know what they mean. That is the opinion of our ulama. We don't know what they mean, but we believe them. Whatever they mean, we're not going to deny them. They're in the Quran, and we believe them. And we believe them according to what God intended by them. And that is the madhab of the Salaf. That is the Salafiyya madhab. And then he says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتَوَقَّ النَّفْيَ وَالتَّشْبِيهَ زَلَّ. Whoever does not guard against denying God's attributes and against anthropomorphism, thinking that God is like His creation, has erred and failed to acquire understanding of divine transcendence. وَلَمْ يُصِبَ التَّنْزِيهِ. So He's made it really clear. I hope it's really clear to everybody. Because, this is our Aqeedah, and I really want you to leave this program with firmly rooted in what this means. Because this is a big fitna of our time, unfortunately. It shouldn't be, but it is. This question was resolved over 1,000 years ago, but people have revived it and want people to fall into their errors. And I'm going to do my best to defend this tradition, because this is not my opinion. This is what I inherited by talaqqi from my teachers. It's what they taught me. It's what they were taught from their teachers. And you can see the sanad in this book. All those people the people that this was transmitted to through these ages. All you have to do is look at these names of these people that are in here. All right, these are the people. Because this is related Sheikh Zakaria al-Ansari, Al-Hafidh ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim bin Ahmad al-Tanuhi, al-Ba'li, Muhammad Abd al-Rahman bin Abd al-Mawla bin Ibrahim al-Yaldani, Ismail bin Ahmad al-Iraqi, Abu Musa al-Madini, right? These are the great ulama of our tradition. Imam Dahlawi al-Umri al-Mujaddidi, Muhammad Abid al-Sindi, all these people. And this goes back to Imam al-Tahawi. So these are the meanings that have been transmitted through his time, and this is how we know that these are what he intended. فإن ربنا جل وعلا موصوف بصفات الوحدانية منعوت بنعوت الفردانية ليس بمعناه أحد من البرية. For undoubtedly our Lord the Sublime and Exalted is described with the attributes of unity and uniqueness. No one in creation is any way like Him. وَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ. Now, I mean, this is where he drives it home now. And this is where it ends, this section, all right? So we're done. But he's going to drive it home. He's going to shove this right down your throats. Because if you don't get this, you don't understand anything. وَتَعَالَى اللَّهُ عَنِ الْحُدُودِ وَالْغَايَاتِ. God is transcendent, beyond limits, ends. وَالْأَرْكَانِ وَالْأَعْضَاء, supports, components, or instruments. وَلَا تَحْوِيَ الْجِهَاتُ السِّتُّ كَسَائِرِ الْمُبْتَدَعَاتِ. The 6 directions do not contain Him as they do created things. What are the 6 directions? Right? Front of you, behind you, to the right of you, to the left of you, over you, and under you. God is not in any of those directions. Ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. It's true. Yakhafuna, they have awe of their Lord, and Allah says, "Huwa qahirun fawqa ibadihi." He uses fawq in the Quran. He is above His servants, and that's true. He is over us, but we don't point. And if they say, "Well, the Prophet ﷺ asked the Jariyah, where's your Lord?" Asharat ila sama. She pointed to the heaven, and he said, "Who am I?" And in a riwayah, she actually says, Asharat, and then she says, "You're Rasul." But in the soundest riwayah, she could not speak. She was bakma. And so, Asharat ila sama, that's where Allah, in other words, tanziyah. And then, when he asked, "Who am I?" Asharat ila sama thumma ila rasulillah. In other words, "You're the messenger of Allah." He said, "A'tiqa fa innaha mu'mina." Release her because she's a believer. So that, and then also, Imam Al-Razi said one of the reasons God uses anthropomorphic language is to make common people, if you explained it in pure transcendence, they would think God didn't exist. Like you said, He's in no place, He has no form. People say, so this is a way of just helping people to approximations of meaning. But كُلُّ مَا خَطَرَ بِبَالِكَ فَاللَّهُ خِلَافُ ذَلِكَ. Everything that occurs to your mind, God is other than that. I'm going to keep driving that point home. I'm sorry. But this is our religion. This is our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. So, alhamdulillah, that's it. He has no limits. Now, in one commentary in English that I saw, it said, He has no limits known to us. That's what it said in the commentary. He has no limits known to us. That's not what He says in the text. La hududa. And it's nafi lil jins. La hududa. He didn't say la hududun illa haddun ma'lumun lahu. He could have said that. He said la hududa. There's no limits. So to say there's no limits, and that was because these poor people think if you say He has no limits, it means He's everywhere. It means He's permeating the world. Well, in your understanding, because your little pea brain can't grasp that God is, we're all pea brains. I'm not making fun of them. I'm a pea brain too. We're all pea brains in relation to God. That's it. But don't limit God to your own limitations. Because you can't understand God, don't try to make Him understandable to your limitations. Because it's incomprehensible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why ilah comes from walaha, to be bewildered. Because God is that which bewilders. And Imam al-Junayd said this affair ends in utter bewilderment. This affair ends in utter bewilderment. Hayra. Subhanallah. I mean, that's why we say Subhanallah, because it's Subhanallah. Subhanallah. That's all the angels, they're all saying it. We should all just start saying it. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. Exalted, transcendent is God above anything that we can comprehend. Alhamdulillah. So that section's done. You won't hear me on that again, inshallah. But I needed to do that. I'll quickly go through and then we'll pray. If Abu Bakr was better than Omar, why did the Prophet say if there was a Prophet to come after me, it would be Omar? That was in praise of Omar's genius. That Omar had an ability to get to the truth so quickly. So that was really praising Omar. He's Faruq. And that's his imtiyaz. Abu Bakr is Siddiq. Abu Bakr relates more to Iman. Sayyidina Omar relates more to Islam in that way. Do you see? Because Faruq is the one that distinguishes. I mean, Omar has great Iman. But Abu Bakr, it's all about Iman. So he's talking more about the genius of Omar's understanding. For people coming into Islam, are those strengthening their Iman, how do they reconcile the ayah, enter into the deen completely, udkhulu fi salmi kaffa, with enter into the deen gently? You know, I mean, that means kaffa, that's about Iman, because really that, the silm there that it's talking about to enter into is to enter into the faith completely with faith. You know, to come into this religion utterly with your faith. But when it says awghilu birifqin, it's talking about practices, taking on practices. If you try to take on too much, so there's no contradiction between the verse and the hadith. Let's see. All right. Allah is nothing like we know. Once Imam Hanbal had seen him, did Imam Hanbal have a framework for the beatific vision? He didn't go into detail, but they all have tanzih with this about the division. How do we know when the line between acquiring knowledge and understanding of Islam and pushing questions too far on those hazy issues? You know, the thing about the mutashabihat is that it's important to know that we're living in a time when there is certain people focusing on those things, and that historically that was seen as a very negative thing. And then this is part of the Aqeedah, and that's why he mentions them in there, and that's why I talked about them. But that's all you need to know. What we just covered, you don't need to do it ever again. If anybody wants to bring them up and debate them or something like that, just say, you know, Salamun alaykum la nabtaghi al-jahilin. I mean, you don't have to say that literally, but you know, you should just know right away that something's wrong with it. I won't say where, but I was years ago tested for something for a program, and the guy asked me, well, what is Ar-Rahman ala al-Arsh istawa, which is the throne verse. What does that mean? And I gave the answer of Imam Malik, and he said to me, when Imam Malik said ma'lum, he meant ma'lum lughatan, that we know what it means, literally. And I said, that's not my understanding of that thing. He said, no, that's what it means. So I was just like, okay, why are you testing me on this? I mean, this is going to get me closer to God? Why are you testing me on this? Why do you want to know what I think about that? I mean, it's like, Grand Inquisitors or something like that. Seriously, it's like mahakam al-taftish, like the inquisitorial courts, auto de fe. Let's test you. And then next thing I'll be in one of those orange suits with things over my ears or something like that. What is that? Why are people so worried about what other people believe? Do you know? Really? It's un-American. Thomas Jefferson said, whether my neighbor believes in one God or 20 gods does not rob my pocket nor break my leg. It's just like, leave people alone. I mean, if they're worshiping 20 gods, you can tell them there's only one God and, I'm doing you a favor. But if he wants to keep worshiping the 20 gods, let him keep worshiping them. Seriously. Muslims lived with Hindus. They lived with all these different people. They lived with Buddhists. Sadiq al-Ghiryani, in his book of Maliki Fiqh, he's a modern scholar, a friend of mine. he says secularists, atheists, they can all, live under Islam. There's no, la ikraha fi din. Don't coerce people into religion. The Quran says, do you want to force people into being believers? You can't do it. All coercion does is create hypocrites. That's all it does. It creates hypocrites. وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة. Do the Mufassirun leave the tafsir blank? No, I mean they talk that this is the vision. They're looking at their Lord. But it's bila kayf wala inhisar. Right? I mean that's bila kayfin wala inhisari. وَإِنَّا رَبَّنَا تُدْرَكُ بِالْأَبْصَارِ بِلَا كَيْفٍ وَلَا انْحِصَارِ. Jawharat al-Tawheed says our Lord will be seen with vision, but not in any modality and not by ihata. It's not. There's no containment because He can't be contained. And then the Mu'tazilite debate. I mean, the Mu'tazilite reject the ru'ya and they say it's irrational and that God can't be seen, and they use the verse that vision cannot contain Him, but He contains vision, and they say that he says that. But to say that the word nadira doesn't mean looking, it means muntadira, waiting. Because in Arabic it could be interpreted to mean waiting. He said waiting is adab. When you're waiting for your beloved, he said it's al-maut al-ahmar. It's the red death. The Arabs say al-intidar mautun ahmar. Waiting for something is the red death. It's the worst type of death. So waiting for God as a reward, because the verse is a reward. So their reward is that they're glowing and waiting for God. He's saying that's not a reward, it's a punishment. But that's a Mu'tazilite trying to get out of, and that just shows you how when you try to prove something that's silly, you end up saying silly things. Can you indirectly generalize the people of fitna are people that lack intellect? I mean, sometimes they have, Aristotle said that intellect is a mean between craftiness and stupidity. So sometimes you have people that are very crafty and they can be brilliant in that way, but they don't have real intellect in that intellectus to really distinguish between truth and falsehood, because that's what intellectus, aql is ya'qiluka, it prevents you from going into error. So they don't have intellect in that way, but they definitely have a craftiness, and some of them are quite brilliant. I mean, some of them, Christopher Hitchens is very clever. I actually enjoy listening to him sometimes because, I like the way he strings words together, and there's something about British, Cambridge trained sophists that's, it's something interesting for people that like language. And he's a good writer too. I've actually read 4 of his books, so he is a good writer. Although once I was reading him, and I was kind of admiring the language, and then this is a true story. I put him down and I picked up Gibbon's, Gibbon, and I started reading Edward Gibbon, and it was night and day. Just writing was paled in comparison. So modern writers, I'm not a big fan of modern writing, including my own, but in terms of Aqeedah, if one is not Ash'ari or Maturidi, are they on an incorrect path? I mentioned earlier, that I personally, and this is a lot of my shuyukh would not agree with this, but Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya does, and it's not because of Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, but this is my own conclusion from reading and things like that. I do believe that there is an Athari Aqeedah that is sound, that is not Ash'ari or Maturidi. And I do believe it's a valid Aqeedah, and you can find it within the Hanbali tradition, not the Mujassima min them, not the anthropomorphists. And Imam al-Tahawi is very close to the Athari. I mean, this is an Athari Aqeedah more than Ash'ari and more than Maturidi. Although the Maturidis definitely base a lot of their, because this is based on Fiqh al-Akbar, Abu Hanifa's text, or at least it's attributed to him. But I think it's valid to say that the Athari is it's that dialectical theology, which is what the later Ash'aris are, from Abu Bakr al-Baqallani on. It's a dialectical theology, and the Maturidis are also of that ilk. Personally, I think it's a great contribution to the Islamic tradition. I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive. I know that there's a lot of modern Muslims just think that they went off, but I don't think they did. All three of those are perfectly valid. They're all valid. And the Ash'aris, I'm mufawwid. I don't do ta'wil of the ayat in the Quran of, the yad means qudra, the ayn means inaya, ضحكه, ridwanuhu, istiwa'uhu, ghalabatuhu. All those, I don't do those. That's, I prefer the tafwid. That they mean what they mean, and Allah knows what they mean, and I believe in whatever Allah intended by them, but I'd rather not say what they mean, because it's just, I think it is a safer madhab. But I'm certainly not going to call those great imams mubtadi'ah or, a'udhu billah. Do you think the reason why the Muslims have confined the religion to one way of practice is due to the hadith which states that this religion will divide into 73 sects and only one will enter paradise? And I left two things for you to follow, the Quran and Sunnah, so stick to these and you will not go astray. First of all, I don't think, the question seems to be asking, do I think the reason why Muslims that confine the religion to one way of practice is due to the hadith which states that this religion will divide into 73 sects? I think it's a misunderstanding of the hadith. But yeah, I would agree that that's definitely one of the hadiths that they use to say there's only one way, which is ma ana alayhi wa ashabi. And that is true. But what they have done is like the Bedouin who urinated in the masjid, and when the Prophet had, the Sahaba wanted to, attack him, and the Prophet had him veiled, and then when he finished, he explained to him very gently, that this is a clean place, and don't, and the man raised his arm, he said, Allahumma arhamni wa raham Muhammadan wa la tarham siwana. Have mercy on me and Muhammad and nobody else. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you have constrained the vast. To me, it's a kind of that mentality. It's a very similar mentality. And also the idea that they're all in hell, there's 73 sects. Raghib Isfahani relates it through kulluha fil jannah illa wahida. All of them go to paradise eventually except for one. And Imam al-Ghazali says when the Prophet said that they were in hell, it doesn't mean they're going to hell. It just means that they deserve to before he intercedes for them. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, Shafa'atu li ahl al-kaba'iri min ummati. The shafa' is for the people of big sins in my community. My intercession is for the people of big sins. So, these people think that, paradise is like a little hotel that's been, completely, that they've got the reservations and nobody else is going. Really, that's what they think about it. But the Quran says that heaven is arduha samawati wal ard. It's bigger than the heavens and the earth. Now we know that there's billions of galaxies out there. So if paradise is, where are all the people going to go? What, it's for all 50 of you? It's a big place. And Muhammad al-Hasan al-Dadu, who I really like, and he's got his views about things. He's a genius and he's a great scholar, and I can't even put myself, there's no comparison at all. But he appreciates me and my views about things. And he gave a talk once, and somebody asked him, where are the Jews and the Christians? And then I said, and he said, well, the Quran's clear about that, and the Hadith's clear, Jews and Christians, they go to hell. And So when we left, we were in the car, and I said to him, you know, Sheikh Muhammad al-Hassan, I wish you wouldn't have said that. And he said, what? I said, about the Jews and the Christians. And he said, why? And I said, have you read Faisal al-Tafriqa by Imam al-Ghazali? He said, no. I said, you should read that. And I just said, you know, those hadiths and those ayahs about that, I mean, they really need to be interpreted, you know, with kufr, that people know the truth and then they reject it. And then, and I said, and that's what Imam al-Ghazali points out. And he said, that sounds like a good, he said, al-Jannah wasi'a, ana ma indi mushkila, Allah yudkhiluhum jami'an. He said, you know, paradise is vast, I don't have a problem. If Allah wants to bring them in, He can bring whoever He wants in. It's going to be a big place, plenty of room. There's not going to be any, you know, hustling and bustling at the door. Once you're in, everything's comfortable. Really. Nobody's going to get in your face. Nobody's going to ask you what your Aqeedah is. They'll assume it was good enough to get in. Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khairan. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك